Thaddeus Crow hadn't spoken to anyone in 3 months. The silence that surrounded his isolated ranch had become a comfort to him over the years, a shield he had built against the world. But on this scorching summer afternoon, the tranquility was shattered by a sound that would forever change his life. Voices. Real human voices. He'd forgotten how strange and jarring it was to hear them, the kind that filled the air with warmth and life. Thaddeus dropped the hammer he had been using to repair the fence. His eyes narrowed as he squinted toward the main road. 3 figures were making their way toward his land, their silhouettes casting long shadows in the midday heat. His horse, usually calm and steady, shifted uneasily beneath him. Thaddeus felt his heart beat a little faster. For the past several years, he had been alone. The nearest neighbor, Boone Carter, lived 15 miles away, and their interactions were few, mostly business or occasional exchanges of supplies. Thaddeus liked it that way. Solitude had become a habit, a necessary refuge from a world that had once been full of pain and disappointment. He hadn't seen anyone since the supply run to town in spring. So when the figures appeared at the edge of his property, Thaddeus's first instinct was to reach for his rifle. It wasn't fear that made him do so. It was the habit of living alone for so long, where every stranger was a potential threat. The 3 women moved slowly, each step careful and deliberate. Their faces were etched with exhaustion. The first woman, wearing a faded bonnet and a worn gray dress, looked as though she had carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. The other 2 followed behind, each with children clinging to their skirts. The youngest, a small girl no more than 4, stumbled in the dirt and let out a high-pitched cry. Thaddeus felt his chest tighten. He had seen that look in the eyes of children before, fear mixed with weariness. The moment they arrived at the edge of his land, the woman in front raised her hand in greeting, but her smile was strained, almost pleading. "Sir," she called out, "we don't mean any trouble. We just need to speak with you for a moment." Thaddeus stood motionless by the fence, studying them carefully. The women looked desperate, tired, but there was something in their eyes that made it clear they were not mere travelers passing through. They were running from something, and as they drew closer, it became painfully clear that their circumstances were far more serious than a simple request for shelter. "Where did you come from?" Thaddeus asked, his voice neutral, though his hand instinctively tightened around the rifle. He could feel his chest tighten, his pulse quicken. The lead woman, Clarabelle, hesitated before speaking. "We were staying in a boarding house about 20 miles east," she said, her voice hoarse from the long journey. "But the man who ran it, well, he's not a good man. When we refused to pay his price, he told us we had until sunrise to leave, and when we didn't, he sent someone after us." Thaddeus felt a jolt of anger in his gut. He had known men like that. Predators who used their power to take advantage of people with no place to go. He had built this ranch to escape people like him, to avoid the kinds of situations that required a man to choose sides, to choose who was worth saving. "And now you're here," Thaddeus said softly, more to himself than to her. His mind raced as he processed what he had just heard. These women had nowhere else to go. They had risked everything to find him, a man they knew only by name, hoping that he would give them shelter. But why? "We've been walking since dawn," Clarabelle continued, "and we heard about you from a woman in town. She said you lived alone. She said you were kind, that you'd help us." Thaddeus felt the weight of their hope resting on his shoulders, a burden he hadn't asked for but was now unwilling to turn away. He had spent years closing himself off from the world, from the pain of loss and the cruelty of others. But now these 3 women, with their children, were asking him to open that door once again. And the thought terrified him. He thought about his past, the family he had lost, the silence he had chosen to fill the space where once there had been love and laughter. But now, with the sound of children's cries and the look of desperation in their eyes, something inside him stirred. He couldn't ignore it, no matter how much he tried to convince himself that helping them would only lead to more pain. "Do you have food?" Thaddeus asked suddenly, his voice rougher than he intended. His gaze lingered on the children the way they clung to their mothers, the fear still evident in their eyes. Clarabelle looked down, her voice soft as she answered, "The children haven't eaten since yesterday morning. We were hoping to find something here." Thaddeus nodded silently. He had never been one for idle conversation, especially with strangers, but the reality of their situation began to sink in. These women were running from more than just a man demanding payment. They were running from a life that had beaten them down, leaving them with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. And now, they had come to him. "I'll fix something," Thaddeus said, moving toward the kitchen. He wasn't sure how to feel about what was happening. It was easier to close the door, to retreat into the silence he had known for years. But something about the way these women and their children looked at him made it impossible to walk away. As he opened the pantry door and began rummaging for something to feed them, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The quiet of the house, the stillness he had fought so hard to maintain, felt fragile now. The sound of children's laughter, which he hadn't heard in so long, seemed almost foreign to him. His hand stopped midway to the shelf, when Clarabelle's voice broke the silence again. "Mr. Crow," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something we haven't told you. Something about why we had to leave so quickly." Thaddeus turned, his heart racing. He could feel the shift in the air. He wasn't sure what she was about to say, but he had a feeling it would make everything more complicated. And as she spoke, he realized that the peace he had fought for all these years was about to be shattered once again. Thaddeus didn't waste time standing there, debating the situation. The moment the sheriff and Garrett dismounted, his instincts took over. He moved quickly to the back of the house, where the children were still hidden. The door creaked as it closed, but the silence in the house felt like a heavy weight pressing on his chest. Every part of him wanted to retreat, to let the sheriff take the women and be done with it. But he couldn't do that anymore. He wouldn't. He could hear the faint sound of conversation outside, their words too distant to make out, but the tone was unmistakable. Threatening. They were sizing him up just like they'd always done, and this time it wasn't just about him. It was about the women, the children, and everything he had worked so hard to avoid. Thaddeus moved silently through the darkened hallways, careful not to alert the women. Clarabelle, Mercy, and Violet had settled in the back room with the children, but the fear radiating off them was palpable. He could hear little Samuel whispering to his mother, asking if everything was okay, and the sound broke his heart. It made him wish for the impossible, to turn back the clock, to be able to protect them from this nightmare. Stepping into the kitchen, Thaddeus took a deep breath. His eyes lingered on the dusty shelves, the overturned furniture, the emptiness that had once been a home. It was strange, how the silence felt deafening now that he wasn't alone. He had been alone for so long, and now, with the women and children in his home, everything had changed. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of responsibility, not just to himself, but to them. The weight of the rifle in his hands was comforting. It was a symbol of protection, of standing firm when everything else felt uncertain. He knew that soon, he would have to make a decision, one that could change everything, and he couldn't run from it. The sound of hooves echoed from outside, the approach of the sheriff and his men. They weren't here for a friendly conversation. Thaddeus had no illusions about that. He couldn't risk the women being taken, not after everything they had been through. But the confrontation he was about to face wasn't just with the sheriff. It was with everything he had hidden from himself for so many years. The front door rattled lightly as the sheriff knocked again. "Thaddeus," he called out, his voice dripping with false familiarity. "We don't want any trouble, but we need to talk about those women you've taken in." Thaddeus gripped his rifle tighter, steadying himself against the flood of emotions rushing through him. He couldn't let them take the women. Not now, not after everything they had been through. He wasn't the man who would stand by and let it happen. Not anymore. In the quiet of the back room, Thaddeus could hear the soft shuffle of feet as the women moved cautiously, trying to stay out of sight. It wasn't the first time they had been forced to hide, but it was the first time they had trusted someone enough to seek refuge. Thaddeus felt the weight of that trust pressing down on him like a boulder. "Thaddeus." The sheriff's voice cut through the air again, more insistent this time. "We know you're in there. It's better for you if you just come out and talk. We don't want to cause any trouble." Thaddeus clenched his teeth. He couldn't give in. Not now. A sudden realization struck him like lightning. The women hadn't just come here for safety. They had come for a future. They had come to him because they trusted him, because they believed that there was more to life than running, hiding, and being preyed upon. They believed in the man he had been before, the one who had been willing to fight for what was right. And that man had been buried under years of pain, isolation, and fear. But now, in this moment, he realized that it was time for him to stand up, not just for himself but for them. Thaddeus didn't wait for the sheriff's next words. He walked calmly to the door, rifle in hand, and stepped out onto the porch. His boots hit the wooden steps with a soft thud, but it was enough to draw the sheriff's attention. He could see the confusion in Cale's eyes as he sized up the situation. "You've got your answer, Cale," Thaddeus said, his voice steady but firm. "I'm not going anywhere. These women are under my protection." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake, Thaddeus," he said, his voice hardening. "These women are criminals. You've got no business standing in their way. They took something from Mr. Garrett, and I'm here to make sure they pay for it." Thaddeus didn't flinch. "I don't care about your rules anymore, Cale. I don't care about your so-called justice. You're not taking anyone from here." Cale's hand hovered over his holstered weapon, but something in Thaddeus's stance made him hesitate. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Thaddeus wasn't just standing in the way of the sheriff. He was standing in the way of a corrupt system that had fed on people like these women for far too long. And Thaddeus wasn't going to let that happen. Garrett, still on horseback, shot Thaddeus a look of pure malice. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You're just a man hiding in the middle of nowhere. You can't stand up to us. We'll make sure you regret this." Thaddeus kept his eyes locked on Garrett, refusing to back down. "You'll regret it long before I do," he said, his voice calm and unwavering. The sheriff stepped forward, but before he could make his move, the sound of hooves reached their ears again. Thaddeus's heart skipped a beat. More riders, and from the sound of it, they weren't here to assist the sheriff. He turned his head slightly, scanning the horizon. The riders were moving fast, and they were coming in from the main road. As the dust cloud grew thicker, Thaddeus's pulse quickened. The riders reached the gate, and Thaddeus's eyes widened as he recognized the leader. It was Wade McKinley, a man who commanded respect throughout the territory. Thaddeus had heard of him before, rumors of a rancher with an iron will and a sense of justice that ran deeper than anyone else in the area. And now, it seemed McKinley was about to change everything. The sheriff's expression shifted from frustration to concern as he took in the new arrivals. "McKinley," he said, his voice tight with uncertainty. McKinley dismounted with the calm assurance of someone who had nothing to fear. "Sheriff," he said, acknowledging the lawman with a brief nod before turning his attention to Thaddeus. "What's going on here, Crow?" His voice was steady, but Thaddeus could see the weight of his gaze. He was assessing the situation, calculating the next move. "They've come for these women," Thaddeus replied, his tone firm, "and they'll have to go through me first." McKinley's eyes flicked to the sheriff, then back to Thaddeus. He could see that something had changed in the air. The tension was palpable, but McKinley's presence had shifted the odds. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure of how to proceed. He had come with the full force of the law behind him, but now, with McKinley's presence, the balance of power had tilted. "You've made a mistake, Crow," the sheriff said, his voice strained. "You can't protect them forever." Thaddeus's jaw tightened. "We'll see about that," he said, his voice low and unwavering. "You're not taking them. Not today." McKinley stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen it all. "You need to leave, Sheriff. The law is with these women now, and if you don't like it, you're welcome to try and do something about it." The sheriff stood there for a long moment, the weight of the situation sinking in. He could feel the eyes of McKinley's men on him, could feel the tension in the air, and he knew he was outmatched. The law had failed these women for too long, and now it was time for something else, something that couldn't be bought, manipulated, or controlled. Finally, the sheriff holstered his weapon, a grimace crossing his face. "This isn't over, Crow," he muttered, turning on his heel. But for now, I'll let you have your little victory." As the sheriff and Garrett retreated, the dust rising behind them, Thaddeus stood tall, the weight of the rifle in his hands a reminder of the battle he had just won. But as he turned back toward the house, he knew the real fight was just beginning.